In 2020, 3 major things happened. 2, I needed to get my dissertation done while being locked in my room for a year. And because of that, 3, I may have gotten way, embarrassingly, way too into Lupin the Third. Look, I needed something to take my mind off of it, okay? We all remember how miserable that year was, and I only made it worse for myself by spending it writing a dour, surreal horror film about being trapped in a house with your family. For metaphorical reasons, not like schmovid reasons. And I don't know, I guess what I needed to get through the whole thing was a 50-year backlog of stupid gay crime shit with music that just fucking goes for it all the time. One of my favorite games to play is giving people 3 Lupin plots and then making them figure out which ones are real and which ones I made up. Sometimes I just give them all real ones to fuck with them. It's so great. A vampire woman who turns out to be Jesus' twin sister. Goemon fights a dual-wielding lumberjack who is also Jaws. Leonardo da Vinci, but he's like a clone? And he's jacked! The library of content for this series is absolutely obscene. You have video games, an all-female musical, a live-action spin-off, an all-female musical, a theme park show, an all-female... Oh wow. But the fact is, if anyone knows anything about Lupin, 9 times out of 10, they know it through Hayao Miyazaki. His debut film, The Castle of Cagliostro, is not exactly the best-known entry in Miyazaki's filmography, which, you know, I have some opinions about, but whatever. But it is the best-known piece of Lupin media, and it is not necessarily hard to put together why that might be. Because that's the deal with Miyazaki, that he's like an auteur. He's the farmer's market of directors. It's all coming organic and from the source, and when he makes eye contact with you when you walk out of the grocery store with your 8th frozen pizza this week, you feel a deep sense of personal shame, because he knows his stuff isn't that expensive, and it all tastes good, and you really like it, and he knows you like it. You just keep buying pizza out of force of habit and convenience, and you don't always have the time to cook a good meal, and would you stop fucking staring at me if I buy 1 bag of carrots? Is that good enough for you? But that's where our old pal Green Jacket Lupin comes in. You can sort them by jackets. It's kind of a thing. Y'all are too mean to Pink Jacket sometimes, by the way. I kind of think it owns. Green Jacket Lupin is like the framed basketball jersey hanging over the rest of the series, and that's pretty much because like 70% of it is Miyazaki. Anytime he shows up in the green, bam, that's Miyazaki. Or at least they really want you to think of Miyazaki. But what the Green Jacket era really provides us is the rare opportunity to observe Miyazaki in an environment where his work doesn't exist in isolation, to watch him yassify someone else's stuff in real time, so to speak. So we're gonna go back and take a look at all the shit he added that inadvertently made Lupin the prototype for all the famous stuff he did afterwards. Now, I hear you ask me, is it even real Miyazaki? If he didn't grow it from his own garden, can we truly call it farm fresh? And I'm gonna answer your question with a question because you chose to click on this video and yet for some reason you're doubting my logic here. Is Thor Ragnarok a Taika Waititi film, even if he didn't create the characters or write the script himself? I didn't think so. Think before you talk. Lupin the Third Part 1, no, they didn't call it that when it came out, is considered one of the first anime specifically directed towards mature audiences, and a lot of that has to do with the original director, Masaki Yosumi. He directed the pilot film which got the series launched in the first place, and you can tell that even though the show was nowhere near as explicit as the original manga, he really wanted to create something adults would take seriously. You can also tell this because in 1969 he directed a Moomin series and he gave all the Moomins guns, which Tove Jansson hated so much she canceled the contract with the anime studio and took it to a completely different studio to finish halfway through production. This is going to be relevant later. Ostensibly, the main cast of Part 1 is Lupin, Jigen, and Fujiko. Lupin and Jigen are trying to commit a crime, Fujiko is also there trying to kill them, Goemon's more of a recurring cast member, and Zenigata shows up occasionally to get in the way of crime happening, but for the most part, you're spending your time with the main 3. There's a really big push for interactions with the criminal underground. The first episode introduces this big organization called Scorpion, who construct an elaborate trap to kill Lupin with a bomb at a racetrack, which cost them millions of dollars to build. And obviously, if you're watching Lupin for the first time, you think, oh, so these are the bad guys for the rest of the series, and then he single-handedly murders all of them in one episode. A lot of problems get solved with murder in this first stretch. The first half of part 1 takes itself pretty seriously, which on the one hand is precisely what some of these stories need. In the third episode, Farewell My Beloved Witch, Lupin has to choose to kill a woman to prevent a private militia from harvesting a bioweapon. And that's not a decision the show takes lightly. It has to address that it was a dark choice to make, but also a necessary one. It's just that in other cases, you'll have a really tense episode about Fujiko getting shot and kidnapped by her old lover, an assassin who was forced to betray her by the syndicate, and he's been seeking her out ever since, looking for forgiveness, except the assassin's name is... Poon? It's just Poon. Why did you name him that, guys?
What name? Who are you, Seal?
Speaking of which, I find it hilarious that there's a weird emphasis on Fujiko being an outsider and having a secret past, as if who she is and why she commits crime is some sort of larger mystery that just begs to be solved. They really will not stop bringing it up. Keep in mind, we get no indication that we're gonna ever explore why Lupin or Jigen do any of the things they do, but Fujiko, clearly there has to be a reason. A woman doesn't just do crime. I wonder if this topic is going to come back at some point in the franchise's lifetime. The focus kind of winds up being on Lupin's rivalry with her more than anything, which, I mean, I guess makes sense because he's already BFFs with Jigen. Zenigata hates his guts, but like in a totally straight way. And it only takes Goemon 2 episodes to decide he and Lupin are chill. Fujiko's whole thing is that she's constantly double-crossing them, so yeah, I understand that the relationship with the most dramatic tension is theirs. It's just that the show doesn't seem interested in setting up that kind of tension between Lupin and anyone else for future episodes, though obviously we're getting into speculation at that point. I don't want to sound like I hate the Osumi episodes just because I'm focusing on the Miyazaki stuff, and I definitely don't want to shit on them for being dark. I fucking love when Lupin gets dark. A lot of people enjoy this half of the series, and I really do see why. There are some good episodes in this batch, and I like that it sets a precedent for the Green Jacket material to be less bonkers than all of the Red Jacket stuff that comes after it. If it was just a straight adaptation of the manga, it wouldn't have worked, and Osumi's dedication to creating a consistent tone which humanizes the characters while still allowing them to be kind of ruthless is one of the better contributions to the franchise as a whole. The problem is that it doesn't feel like they're using all of the tools at their disposal. And that means it doesn't feel sustainable. And also, it's really adult. Audiences did not like that it was too adult. And Osumi would not change it. So, halfway through the series, they kicked him out and found a couple guys who would. Sometimes when a show switches directors mid-season, you can't really tell there's been a change made. Creating a television show is a team effort, especially in animation, so usually, if you're doing your job right, any behind-the-scenes shakeup isn't going to be noticeable. That is 100% not the case with the second half of part 1, which you can tell immediately was made by Isao Takahata and Hayao Miyazaki, Ghibli's future code daddies. This wasn't necessarily their first rodeo. Takahata had directed his first film a couple years earlier with Miyazaki and their mentor Yasuo Otsuka as animators. Otsuka, by the way, being the guy who chose them to replace Osumi once Osumi got shit-canned. But this is Miyazaki's first directorial credit, and from the word go, you see him taking the chance to really stretch his legs and figure out what his style is. What makes it even more impressive is that this is the half of the show that would really come to shape the rest of the franchise going forward. Sure, it ultimately didn't save part 1 from being cancelled, but it ripples through everything that's followed it, almost more so than Cagliostro sometimes. Miyazaki's idealism really helps balance out the more grounded edge of the Osumi stuff, and the combination of the two set a great precedent for what it was possible for the series to be. First thing to get struck off the ledger is all this criminal underground stuff. Less time with the mafia, or private militias, or Scorpion, who are all still very dead after that racetrack thing, by the way. I mean, they are occasionally going up against other criminals, but they're I don't know, they're independently motivated, which is really refreshing after spending so much goddamn time with the mob in the first half. Like, sometimes they're trying to outsmart a rich guy who sucks, sometimes they're fighting an island of amateur thieves who suck, and yeah, sometimes it is a mob boss, but it's spaced out a bit between episodes where it's Lupin versus the cops, which is the direction most of the rest of these episodes go. In the Osumi episodes, there's less concern over the practicalities of things. There's always enough money, there's always a comfortable place to live, there's always a fancy car to drive, he has a giant seaside mansion as his base of operations. But one of the defining attributes of Miyazaki's Lupin is that he seems to be working out of the trunk of his Fiat. He's always on the move, he buys tools from the supermarket, he only uses whatever he can fit in his pocket. If he still has plenty of money, he's not using it to cover day-to-day expenses. He's on a budget, you know? It gives him more of like a whimsical feel. Now there's scrappy thieves roaming around and pulling off impossible scores. It's charming, you know, be gay, do crime. The show does not increase or decrease in gayness in this half, by the way. The whole first series is just insanely homosexual. The whole franchise is insanely homosexual, but that is an entirely different discussion. There are so many staples of his that you can spot immediately, even with a limited amount of time and money. People driving like maniacs, poofy clothes, long beats of silence, short-haired girl bosses, anime food meme, a somewhat unrealistic number of weird-ass flying machines. There's a lot of Proto-Ghibli stuff in here, actually. Not just the animation, but some of the environments. You start to notice that they seize any opportunity to add crowds of people in the background, like the small army of riot cops, right? In previous episodes, they'd just be like standing around, holding guns, maybe like pointing at something. But now they're all moving around and taking up all this space in chase scenes. And I should really stress that the animators did not have any time to do this. The second episode of theirs, there's a scene where they're following a guy in a boat, and for like 10 seconds you just get a perspective shot of the boat like slowly turning. I mean, obviously a boat this size is not going to turn at a fucking right angle, but you don't consider how long it actually takes to turn a boat until it's happening in real time in your fun crime cartoon. But then you're like, oh yeah, I wonder who directed that. Of course, their most infamous contribution to the quote-unquote Lupin canon is more of a reduction. To put it bluntly, they did not care for some of the characters. Well, no. Jigen and Goemon actually remained largely the same. Weirdly enough, they're at their cuddliest even in the Osumi episodes of Part 1, probably because they're not sick of Lupin being a giant simp yet. In Fujiko's case, they obviously tone down her sexuality, but play up her pettiness a little more. She's kind of a brat, and it's great. Also, these fits are just really fucking nice. Look at her. Goddamn. But there's no getting around it. Lupin was just too much of a selfish piece of shit for them to tolerate, so they gave him a major attitude adjustment. It's not blatantly apparent from the word go. He's still a huge doofus, he still loves women and treasure and committing crime, but the further into the series you get, the more you see where their influence actually comes in. Just to take a step back here. Across the entire franchise, I'd say Lupin as a character is at his most compelling when you don't entirely know what he's thinking. Up until Miyazaki gets his hands on him, that usually translates to, he acts like a shitty little loser, but he can totally kill you and he won't feel bad about doing it. But I don't think Miyazaki sees the capacity for violence as like a get out of writing characters with death-free card. Lupin will do some terrible things, that is not up for debate, but rather than using the mask to lure people into a false sense of security, Miyazaki turns it into something of a wall Lupin throws up between himself and the people around him. Is he hiding empathy or a lack thereof? How much does he really know or care about a given situation? Always questioning whether his motives are good or purely self-indulgent gives him an edge that doesn't alienate viewers, but it does leave them constantly reevaluating their relationship with him. That's gonna become more relevant down the line than it is at this point, but we gotta bring it up now because these moments where Miyazaki draws attention to that mask become more frequent as Part 1 goes on. The soft spot he has for innocent women has always been a thing. Again, Farewell My Beloved Witch is probably one of the first examples of this trope appearing in the entire franchise, but unlike the titular character in that episode, Miyazaki's one-off women are all completely sexually unavailable. And the thought doesn't even seem to cross Lupin's mind to try. He's really not much of a sexual being at all, he's more of a closet romantic. Now, I like him enough when he's a creepy, horny little goblin man, but I'm not gonna pretend that Softboy Lupin is a bad look. I should also probably mention that the franchise-wide endemic of boring NPC girls who exist exclusively for Lupin to solve their problems is technically accidentally Miyazaki's fault, because this wasn't ever a reoccurring thing before he showed up, but once he left, everyone thought they could do it in a charming and engaging way, even though they very much could not. I am sorry, fellas, you did your best. But the studio also wanted the show to be more comedic, so to balance all the warm and squishy stuff out, we have... This shouldn't really be news to anyone. If you've seen any of Miyazaki or Takahata's movies, you know they've both got a good sense of humor when they want to, but having a cast of grown adults with less of a strict moral compass means they can really cut loose and get into some wild shit. There's an episode with a time traveler named There's an episode with a time traveler named Mamo, except not that one, and the whole plot is that he's gonna go back in time and unalive Lupin by erasing one of his ancestors from history, because I guess one of Lupin's descendants is gonna cuck him in the future. And you remember that the last time we dealt with a guy who had supernatural powers, the gang outsmarted him by figuring out all of his illusions and using them against him. But no, Mamo's actually a time traveler, and their solution is just to trick him into thinking he's in the past, and then violently beating the absolute fuck out of his time machine. You really don't get this anywhere else. Compared to the first run of episodes where most things are solved by Lupin being the coolest, most talented guy to ever live, you see a lot more improvising and petty scheming to the point where you realize that if this were anyone other than Miyazaki and Takahata, they might have accidentally invented It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia 25 years early, and they really do come close once or twice. Not nearly as much as part 2.
Hey ladies, this way! We got a rich widower with a heart condition!
But the stepping stones are there. There's a lot more, I'm gonna call it psychological torment, because they really can't kill unless it's the last resort, so we have to find more inventive ways to solve the problems. Like, you have elaborate distractions like a fucking Lupin flash mob, or airdropping Goemon into a live pageant just to go on a rampage to fuck up the Miss World competition on live TV, or the group just deciding to play along with whatever the plan is to catch him and then derailing it halfway through. It drives home how much they casually put Zenigata through on a regular basis, partly because he is constantly getting in the way, and partly because they always go with the funniest solution on the table. Like, the Osumi episodes prove that they probably don't need to go this far in terms of non-lethal solutions, but come on. This is kind of worth the extra effort. Fujiko constantly betraying them in the first half is framed as like, oh god, why does she keep doing this to us? Why does she keep antagonizing us for no good reason? And then almost immediately, once they have control over the series, that element completely flips and it's like an occupational hazard of bringing her along on heists. Like, at a certain point, it's your own damn fault for not anticipating it. You stupid, horny monkey. Because we're adding all this comic mischief, however, we're seeing another addition to the franchise developing. That being...
cosmic retribution.
I mean, again, they aren't killing people anymore as much, but they are still committing crimes, and Pipa Hayao does not care for that. So once he takes over, you more frequently see treasures getting stolen out from under their noses, or just kinda lost because of some oversight, or maybe they destroy it themselves, because fuck it, we know we're gonna be doing this again in a week anyway, so who cares? No, seriously, a couple of these episodes literally end with Zenigata shouting, "Oh, I'm gonna get..." Fuck. No. I can't do the voice. Oh, I'll get you next week. Like he's Dr. Claw or something. Oh my god, I don't even know why I tried. Typically, they only get to keep it if the person they stole from was, like, an asshole, and they probably did the right thing stopping that guy anyways. Miyazaki winds up imposing a sort of invisible checks and balances system that keeps the cast from getting away with too much, or at least whatever he considers to be too much. But even when they're in the middle of pulling off heists, you see the universe continue to inflict indignity on these characters for the crime of being alive. With Osumi, every scene is an opportunity to build tension and show off how cool and unflappable Lupin is. With Miyazaki, it's an opportunity to punish him for every horrible life choice he's ever made in increasingly absurd and demeaning ways, and it's always funny, and really, for all of the positive changes he's made, he's right that he still does kind of deserve it a little. It definitely strikes a better balance than a bunch of assholes just getting away with everything, you know? It's Always Sunny has been as successful as it is because as much as the gang never faces consequences for anything they do, they also never really win either. Their lives aren't better for being horrible people, they just manage to maintain the cycle of doing stupid bullshit and then moving on to the next stupid bullshit once that's done. And the Lupin cast being nowhere near as morally abhorrent as the gang helps us feel better about the times they do get to succeed, or when they step away from the cartoony antics to get real for half a second, while also still being able to laugh at them when they fuck up. Because rest assured, they are still fucking up. Ah, but lest we forget, not even the gang escaped the woes of Season 1. There was one more cast member who was destined to elevate It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia from good to godly. And in this case, luckily for Miyazaki, it just happened to be the massive narc. Like, if you haven't seen this show, you might think this is a completely out of nowhere take, but if you have, you're nodding your head, because you and I both know that most of the shots in this latter half of the series that Miyazaki was speculated to have animated himself are of Zenigata, and yeah, that might be speculation, but come on. Whoever's animating some of this stuff is having way too much fun under this amount of pressure for it to be anyone else. Of the changes Miyazaki and Takahata made, more screen time for Zenigata is the most obvious. Compare the first 9 episodes where he only shows up like 4 or 5 times with varying degrees of relevance to pretty much the rest of the series. I honestly don't know why he's used so sparingly in that first half. Part of me thinks that they didn't want to overuse him, but I also get the feeling that Osumi found him to be a bit of a killjoy. It's kind of similar to the way they play Fujiko, like a little too straight. They just don't really know how to make him gel with the rest of the cast because from a certain point of view, it's technically his job to stop fun from happening. He's still obsessed with catching Lupin to the point where he'd team up with the fucking mob again, god damn it. But beyond the one episode he spends waiting for Lupin to break out of prison, we don't really form a relationship with him. Don't get me wrong, it's a good episode, it's just the most we ever see of the guy outside of him showing up at a place and getting in the way of things. For the back half of part 1, he's definitely less of an obstacle and more of a member of the main cast. We'd see him at work more frequently, talking to his boss, figuring out how Lupin's gonna commit a crime while Lupin's coming up with an alternate plan to commit the same crime. Occasionally he accidentally serves as the 5th member of the gang because he's so ridiculously predictable that Lupin can pretty much line him up to be exactly where he needs to be for a scheme to go off. But even outside of that, you get a few small insights into his life off duty and how much this one job regularly denies him just a minute of peace. He really struggles to function when he's not working. We obviously don't have a lot of insight on what was happening during production, but there are a few moments where it almost feels like Miyazaki's venting his own frustrations with the crunch he was under through Zenigata because he's constantly doing the best he can and still having to answer for somehow not being good enough. In the penultimate episode, they introduce a computer that can predict what any criminal will do and how to catch them, ostensibly to replace Zenigata, and the whole time they were explaining how it worked, I kept getting these violent flashbacks to that video of Miyazaki slamming an AI animation in front of the people who programmed it, which is still the most impossible thing to watch, and I wonder if he had a notion, even back then, that it was possible someone would try to use technology to do his job one day. I don't know. I just found that really interesting. The thing is that Miyazaki designs his characters to be real people. Ponyo is a magic fish with chicken limbs, but at her core she's just a super excitable toddler. Yubaba may be a bird witch with a giant head, but she's primarily a frugal, ruthless businesswoman. He always starts with who they are, and then he works outwards to create what they are. With Lupin, that is not particularly easy to do because most of the cast are so tied to their ability. Goemon is the best swordsman with the best sword, Jigen's the best shot, Fujiko's super gorgeous and insanely good at stealing. Lupin was literally born into a long line of thieves and has been eagerly following in his family's footsteps for years until he just adopted the title of the world's greatest thief. They don't have anything they need to achieve. They have already achieved it. And if you want to get pedantic and mention that Zenigata has his own famous detective relative, yes, that is true, but it never really comes up in any meaningful way to explain why he's so skilled. Like, clearly Miyazaki is happy to blow it off entirely. He just sees him as an ordinary working class man trying to do the right thing rather than some kind of super cop. And I get the feeling that Miyazaki, being a guy who has a lot of compassion for ordinary people, someone who openly admits to being addicted to his work, kind of latched onto that. I think this is also why you see a few more moments of, like, Zenigata being happy. It doesn't last, which makes it funnier, but you get the impression that, like, every now and then, he just wants to throw the guy a bone and give him a break. Very briefly. The cementing of Zenigata as sort of the moral backbone of the main cast is really the biggest net positive for the series. One that I think people who aren't even that fond of Miyazaki's run would agree strengthens the franchise in the long term. He's really the heart of the group, and I don't know, it's kind of like still having Miyazaki around sometimes. Also, he kind of winds up being the best immediate indicator of how light or dark you can expect any given entry to be. Like, either it's, oh, okay, we're in for business as usual, or, alright, it looks like there's gonna be more stakes this time, or... And isn't it a little nice to know there's always gonna be someone there to keep you from going over the edge? I mean, ostensibly, that's also Frank's job.
Hi, ladies. I'm Frank. Shit.
But where Frank kind of goes in the opposite direction by being so gross that the gang has to step back and reevaluate their own standards, Zenigata is there to sort of hold the line, both in and out of universe. To be a voice of reason, or as reasonable as one can be in this show. A voice of reason which everyone routinely ignores when it's inconvenient for them, which is most of the time, but a voice of reason all the same. Because what's ultimately missing from the Osumi episodes is the concept of the cast being kind of tied together for life. Even if Fujiko is frequently the friend nobody likes.
And I will not yield to the gentleman.
Because you have no honor, you goddamn bitch. You have no honor! See what I'm talking about?
They're always gonna find each other whether they like it or not. You see this theme pop up later with Miyazaki's Sky Pirates, that what they lack in morality, they make up for in camaraderie and love for each other. And this cast does love one another more than they do treasure or fancy cars or cool guns. They would never say it, but they do. That element has always been in the franchise, and it's only continued to grow since Miyazaki's departure. He's always been a guy who, no, you know what, that's fucking bullshit. Some people don't think these characters like each other that much, and I think that's kind of horse piss. How do you justify doing as much as these characters have canonically done with one another, and then being like, oh no, we're just like work friends, I don't even like you all that much, why do we hang out? That makes no sense to me. I'm sorry, I'm gonna get back on track. No, there's no real way to say, like, no, it's continued, because some people are so aggressively no homo when they're writing this franchise. Like, no, not that there's anything wrong with that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Like, stop trying to be Miyazaki and then being like, oh no, they, you know, not that there's anything wrong with that. God damn. He's always been a guy who looks for the heart in every character he's ever written, and I think he quickly honed in on the fact that that maybe the real treasure was the friends they made along the way. Although the treasure is nice too, when they can get it. So that's the thesis on which Miyazaki chooses to leave the story behind, with all 5 of them stuck in the middle of the ocean with no money and no boat, just swimming wherever the next great adventure awaits, always caught in the game with one another, for better or for worse. And you know, even though it may not have been the kind of material Miyazaki would have chosen for himself, I think he got a lot out of it. You really watch him grow just over the course of this series alone. Even though his time with Lupin was at an end, his future was only beginning. Wait, hang on. No, actually, he came back. Okay, before I leave the topic of Zenigata, real quick, I just want to point out that in the version of Cagliostro you can watch on Netflix, he introduces himself as Inspector Keibu Zenigata. Keibu is just the word for inspector in Japanese. His name in English is fucking Moon Zenigata. I'm sorry if this is what you primarily came here to see me discuss, because like I said, this is the one film of his that people very rarely actually watch, let alone critically dissect. But of his contributions to the Lupin franchise, hell, of any of his early work, this is the one most people are likely to know about. I've literally written a whole article about it already, so I don't know if our time is best spent going too deep into it, but I'll hit the most important points. The Castle of Cagliostro is one of those films you've seen referenced even if you don't necessarily know it. It is literally a foundational text in the history of the Disney Renaissance and the formation of Pixar. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is often referred to as the first Ghibli film, and I do get why that is, but Cagliostro is the first Miyazaki film, and I don't just mean that in the literal sense. Both films were thrown together in an inordinately short amount of time. Nausicaa in around 9 months, Cagliostro in 7. But unlike Nausicaa, which already had the foundation of Miyazaki's own manga, Cagliostro had nothing but the Shore's core cast. Whatever pre-production material the film might have had was all but abandoned by Miyazaki, who only had 2 months to storyboard before animation began, completing it during the 5 months of animation leading up to its December release. This is Miyazaki performing under a level of pressure we'd never really see him under again, and it's crazy how hard it is to tell that was the case when you're watching it for the first time. You get to see him use every last bit of technical wizardry he can to turn 5 months of production into animation that still looks really good to this day, and I think that's an invaluable resource for historians and for young artists especially. But what really makes Cagliostro so satisfying is that Miyazaki finally gets to do what he's been itching to since he got his hands on Lupin and force him to have a little goddamn character growth. You actually wouldn't be able to tell this from like the first hour or so. For the most part, it's largely what you'd expect. Unless you were watching this in 1979 after seeing The Mystery of Mamo a year before in theaters in Japan, in which case this was decidedly not what you would expect, but I'm gonna go back to that. Uncover a counterfeiting operation, save a cute girl from an arranged marriage, destroy some cars, bully Zenigata, yada yada yada. It's all the typical peaks and valleys of a Lupin story, it's an intriguing mystery, it looks great, and it is a lot of fun. And then Lupin gets shot. I am a ridiculous shell for this movie. I have shown it to a lot of people. I've shown it to family members, I've shown it to friends, I've shown it to students, and every time I reach this point, no matter how invested or apathetic they may have been towards the film, every one of them snaps to attention. Even if it's just for a moment, they're always glued to the screen, wondering what just happened. If there was some obvious sign of danger they missed. There wasn't a sign, but there was something the movie encourages you to forget, however briefly, until it throws it back in your face. That a bullet doesn't know the difference between Lupin's body and any other. You don't have many opportunities to demonstrate this in an episodic series, which has already had complaints about being too adult. You especially don't have many opportunities in half a season. Oh, that reminds me. This is also one of those scenarios where Miyazaki accidentally invents a thing which people reuse all the time. In this case, Lupin getting whumped by the plot for 10 minutes to manufacture drama, to the point where the last TV series did it 4 separate times. Again, not completely his fault, but it does bear mentioning. But you do have time for that in a movie, so an hour in, Miyazaki pulls off one of his most impressive narrative tricks. Lupin hasn't been entirely honest about why he's trying to save this princess. And the film hasn't been entirely honest about when in Lupin's life this presumably takes place. See, rather than being independent of any continuity, which is largely what you should expect with most entries, Cagliostro is a direct conclusion to Part 1. More importantly, it's a conclusion set years later in this Lupin's history after he's gotten a little older and had more time to reflect on his actions, including how he forgot the little girl who saved his life until he rescued her a decade later by sheer chance. Very, very rarely are Miyazaki's leads actively hiding anything. Even characters dealing with self-doubt or guilt speak frankly about their experiences. But had he not been brought to his most vulnerable, it's extremely likely nobody but Lupin would have known the reason he went after the princess. Not even the princess herself. This is the moment Miyazaki's clearly been eager to reach for a while. The moment where we finally see him with the mask well and truly off. No deflecting, no tricks, no lies. The moment where the only option he has left available to him is to be honest about why he does what he does. And what we learn is that Lupin sees himself as kind of a despicable person. He isn't proud of it either. Beyond forgetting the act of kindness that saved his life and abandoning a girl who was going to need him, he doesn't look back on his past kindly. Any of it. He doesn't even really seem to see saving the princess as something that'll redeem him. He just feels as though it's what he needs to do. People didn't respond positively to this turn in Lupin's character at the time. This film came right after The Mystery of Momo, which would take its own hour and a half to unpack, but needless to say, it is almost diametrically opposed to Cagliostro. Like, imagine watching a fucking batshit sci-fi movie about how Lupin is physically incapable of being mature for 2 seconds or he'll die, and then thinking, wow, that was fucking batshit, and going to the next one a year later, and having Hayao Miyazaki sit you down like your dad and tell you that you're not immortal, and living in a vacuum is a childish frame of mind you're gonna regret. The tone is different if you're not expecting it, is all I'm saying. But whether people at the time liked it or not, this scene is really the crux between the stuff that came before it and the stuff that would come after it. Or at least the stuff that followed the movie's reevaluation in later years. See, I'm of the opinion that there were a myriad number of good ways to portray this character. Just because I find this to be one of the strongest doesn't mean it's the best objectively. And honestly, some of the weakest versions are really just directors trying to do Cagliostro's Lupin again, with no real sense of how the pacing and structure of this film really makes the reveals stick you right in the chest. But love it or hate it, this scene of Lupin dropping the act and being as honest as he's capable of being undoubtedly changed everything about the way the character would continue to develop, and that's why you hear a lot of contention about whether Miyazaki ultimately did more harm than good. I've wondered for a while now how to interpret the last scene of the movie, where Clarice begs to go with Lupin and he leaves her behind instead. There's always been some personal subtext I can't really pin down. This series was here for him when he crossed his first major threshold into becoming a director, and now it's launching his film career. From this point onward, the amount of television work he does takes a significant nosedive as he winds up to start up Ghibli. Is Miyazaki Lupin saying goodbye to the world of television to follow through on his ambition? Or is he just a little afraid to take the leap, even though we know now he has nothing to worry about? I've never been able to decide, and I don't really know if there's a right answer. Whichever way you choose to interpret it, the ending is clear. Lupin and Miyazaki are finally parting ways. Sure, their outlooks on the world may not have always been compatible, but they left a positive impact on one another's lives and are better for the encounter, even though their time together is finally at an end. Wait. There's something in my notes, actually. So barely even a year later, Miyazaki comes back to Lupin III again, which is now in the 4th season of a whole second series, greenlit partially because of the success of the first series and reruns, to direct 2 episodes, Wings of Death Albatross and Farewell My Beloved Lupin. Oh yeah, don't worry, this time he's done. Now he's done. Don't worry this time, this is the last time. Definitely not gonna make any more that I have to find. No, he is actually done this time. There honestly isn't a lot to discuss in the first of the 2, Wings of Death Albatross. It's really, really good, and it's a lot of fun, but thematically it's pretty light. It's clearly an excuse for Miyazaki to design a big plane and have action set pieces on the big plane and show a bunch of other smaller, interesting planes fighting around the big plane, and none of this is a complaint, by the way, because if plane movie were a genre, it would belong almost exclusively to Hayao Miyazaki. Between the two, it feels the most like a companion to Cagliostro, just in terms of tone and kinesis and generally contained scale, and saying that people probably shouldn't have war-making factories in their back closet. Notably, this episode is the most conclusive in Miyazaki's reimagining of Fujiko, dangling the kind of cheap sexuality he always hated in front of the audience before letting her absolutely haul ass and single-handedly beat the shit out of everyone. Speaking of which, a lot of nudity in this episode? I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining at all. But I'm just saying that it's weird that it's more than usual, and it's weird that it's coming from Miyazaki. But hey, good for him. It's really the second of the two that opens some interesting doors in how we discuss both Miyazaki's relationship with the franchise and the franchise's relationship with him. Interestingly, it's the series finale of the Red Jacket era, which, as I mentioned, was already characterized by taking the absurdism and comedic sociopathy of Miyazaki's Part 1 work up to 11.
That coochie's a blood-sucking bitch.
What in the hell is the matter with you?
So why they chose him to close out the series is curious to me, especially in a way which lacks the madcap tone of the rest of the Red Jacket run. Nausicaa, yes, really, is piloting the Laputa robot, yes, really, to commit some crime in Tokyo, and even though the Lupin gang is taking full credit, something doesn't feel quite right. Naturally, it falls to Zenigata to check it out, but he hasn't got a lot of time because the Japanese military is already rolling through the city at full force to blow it out of the sky. The scene where Zenigata chases the robot through the streets of Tokyo is really unlike anything else Miyazaki ever staged. It's tense and claustrophobic. We've seen him bomb cities, we've seen the before, during, and after of natural disasters, but something about this feels more intimate, verging on genuinely frightening. His emphasis on filling his frames with large ensembles of background characters pays off in a big way here, driving home the fact that ordinary, unprepared people are caught in the crossfire of what's rapidly devolving into a war zone. The twist of the episode, that Zenigata is Lupin in disguise the entire time, is actually not that much of a twist in hindsight, but it is easy to overlook the obvious clues on first watch. It does, however, raise the question of why he's disguised for as long as he is, when he could just take the costume off once he leaves the police station, then put it back on if he needs to. Typically, once he's done with the disguise, it's gone immediately, almost prematurely. I could get really annoyingly pedantic about it, but it makes all the sense it needs to from a thematic perspective. We see Zenigata going out of his way to stop damage from happening, saving civilians, putting his own life at risk, and we take it for granted that he would do something like that because Miyazaki spent so much time establishing that his greatest strength isn't his endurance or his detective skills, it's his humanity. And that was always the thing Miyazaki never liked about Lupin, wasn't it? That he rarely seemed to think of anyone else, that he didn't really care about the damage he caused as long as he got what he wanted, that the only thing he lived for was his own greed. There's this moment all the way back at the end of Part 1, the first time Miyazaki figured he was wrapping this shit up. In the middle of the ocean, sinking under the waves, Zenigata and Lupin just stare at each other. It's the first real moment they've had since the Osumi run where they aren't fighting, they just stare. Adrift in the same ocean. It's brief, but in hindsight, it makes you wonder how long Miyazaki's been holding on to that moment, where these two people with opposing worldviews realize that they're closer in the grand scheme of things than they believed they were. It's telling that the antagonists of the episode are also in masks, impersonating the gang to sell the robot as a weapon to foreign militaries by staging robberies. Without Miyazaki and Takahata, hell, even without Osumi, this was what Lupin's life could have looked like. Being a wormy little piece of shit with no dignity who sees women as holes and everyone else as disposable. And it's ultimately Lupin's responsibility to grow the fuck up and be a better person than that. He just kind of takes it literally. At no point during this video did I say Miyazaki made him smarter. I think somewhere along the way, he ultimately accepted that he was never going to turn Lupin into someone he wasn't. He was never going to reach some higher purpose, or learn something about himself in a life-altering way, or calm down and find satisfaction in a quiet town in the country. His story wasn't Miyazaki's to complete, and really it's never been anyone's. The best he could do for Lupin was show him how to embrace his own kinder qualities and send him off to the next adventure. What makes these contributions to Miyazaki's body of work so endlessly fascinating to me is that we're so used to seeing him with no parameters, no opportunity that can't be explored. Everything he ever made, once he had the freedom to do so, was creatively motivated, never dictated by a committee. But the idea that you can easily enter an industry and be immediately entitled to that level of privilege is a myth. You can't win all the time, you can't be above compromises, you can't be selfishly motivated and expect that to win you freedom. But what he does instead is he masks the restrictions set before him. You see these flourishes of fantastic animation, these echoes of the work he's so close to beginning, even though you know they had no time or money to include them and did so anyway. You see these characters he knows he can't fundamentally change and watch as he introduces new ways for them to explore their relationships with one another and themselves. You see the love he has for the art, and watch it grow into love for someone he comes to understand better than he ever thought he would. You really get the best of Lupin when modern artists do the same, when they take advantage of every trick they have to create something so good you don't see the lines being drawn in the sand. It's not always easy to do so. It is, in fact, ridiculously difficult to do so, but when a director can crack it, you feel that effort paying off. That's the precedent Miyazaki left behind as he moved on to the heights of his career. Not of prestige or of some untouchable perfect image of what Lupin should be, but of using your heart to create something you can take pride in.
Okay, Delaney.
So, if you enjoyed the video as is, congrats, you're done. Click off like you would if my feelings are not going to be hurt. Thank you for watching. But, if you want, given that you have taken another hour out of your life to watch a 3-year-old video, which is a league away from my new work in terms of editing quality, I might have some add-on thoughts on Miyazaki's legacy. At least the way that it tangibly affects the Lupin franchise. So I dropped this essay about a year and a half before the director of Lupin III the First, Takashi Yamazaki, released Godzilla -1, which was a highlight in a 2023 lineup that was already pretty stacked. Particularly the writing, which I have to celebrate for the way it uses Godzilla as a central metaphor for its protagonist's survivor's guilt. It is genuinely so well written that whenever Godzilla comes back, it's like, oh yeah, wait, what the fuck? And it was such a phenomenal film that it made me wonder, why doesn't the first, a film which he also wrote, work nearly as well narratively? I mean, don't take it the wrong way. It's fun, it looks great, please watch the first. It is by and large a good film, but it is also a flawed film, and it's not particularly difficult as a viewer to identify where the problems are. When the movie is a globe-trotting Indiana Jones adventure, it's largely a fun time. When it comes to the emotional stakes, I think it loses its way a bit. And a lot of that has to do with its lack of balance and how much time it spends developing its female lead, Laetitia. The aim with Laetitia is clearly to give us a Clarice with more to do than get saved. And while the relationship the film builds between Laetitia and Lupin is cute,
It should have been me! It's not fair!
I also think that its priorities in practice are really skewed. It's one thing to want to flesh out your female characters, which by and large I agree with doing, but it feels at times like there is so much Laetitia in this movie that she is practically devouring the goddamn thing whole. If I had to identify the moment that best sums it up, it's the last big scene before the climax, in which Laetitia tells Evil Grandpa he should stop being evil and he chokeslams her instead. Evil Grandpa goes crazy and tries to hijack the UFO but gets beat up by Nazi David Lynch. Laetitia gets untied somehow and tries to hijack the UFO. Nazi David Lynch tries to shoot Laetitia but Evil Grandpa takes the bullet. Flashback, maybe Evil Grandpa loved Laetitia all along. Whatever, he's dead. Laetitia tries to hijack the UFO again, but it's out of battery. Nazi David Lynch gets a crank call telling him Hitler wants to see his UFO, and he doesn't kill Laetitia Laetitia even though he knows how to use the UFO now. And Laetitia, I guess, just decides that she can't really do anything else to try to stop this, and the UFO arrives in Argentina to meet Hitler without any further incident, 'cause sure. All of this happens in 6.5 uninterrupted minutes. What are we doing? No, the franchise isn't a stranger to bang bang boom plot revelations, but unlike the last-minute sci-fi swerves in a movie like Mama or even Legend of the Gold of Babylon, there's the pretense that this is resolving some serious emotional plot threads, as if we've been on the edge of our seat waiting to see how this whole thing with Laetitia and her fake evil grandpa, who has been nothing but awful to her the entire movie, resolves itself in a neat little bow. And not, Lupin the fucking third? The extended periods away from Godzilla work in -1, cause after the inciting attack at the beginning of the movie, Shikishima is basically a broken man. And it creates this great emotional tug of war, cause you want him to accept this lovely found family sprouting up around him, but also, it's been a second since Godzilla showed up, and things seem to be getting a little bit too chummy around here. Lupin is a metaphor for Lupin. There is no symbolic reason that he is there. He's just the main character of this film, and he's vanished for no good reason. Unfortunately, the predictability of a conventional Lupin narrative really takes the wind out of any tension the film is building, which, hey, if Laetitia were interesting, I suppose I wouldn't have any reason to complain. She's kind of interesting. She's not that interesting. This whole plot about Laetitia becoming an archaeologist and her secret lineage and her dream of going to Boston University, which isn't even the best archaeology school in Massachusetts, let alone America, by the way, is well-intentioned, but not only is it not very engaging, its attempt to elaborate on the theme of legacy lands on a very weird note of, the absolutism of genetics? Of course you're a great archaeologist. Your long-lost dead grandfather was a great archaeologist.
I'd say that your love for archaeology is also a sign. I'm the same way, 'cause it's in my DNA.
Look out, here comes the master race.
It also doesn't help that I don't think this movie knows what archaeology is, and at this point it's too afraid to ask. And I know that movie academia is nebulous bullshit, especially in a movie where the twist is that they're looking for an alien craft, but I'm fairly confident that most observations she contributes fall under, anthropology. The Code of Hammurabi! I know this from my archaeology? I don't think that's how that works. But all of these course corrections are operating on the assumption that Clarice is meant to be the co-lead of Cagliostro, and that it's a failure on the movie's part to not flesh her out more. And I'll agree, she's kind of shallow, and she does have more importance to the overall narrative than the gang, but really, they are not co-leads. The main character of Cagliostro is Lupin. They are not a couple. The film is very upfront about this. It especially helps that it is not 1979 anymore, and Miyazaki now has a storied track record of writing some of the most interesting women in animation. And remember, this was made on a very extreme time crunch, so as far as Clarice is from his most engrossing heroine, you can see where he is trying to give her a proactive, endearing personality in what time he has to show it. Which, ironically, is one of the only real critiques I have about -1's script, that its female lead is mostly there to provide fawning, unconditional moral support is kind of, worse. You can see how that's less excusable in a film from 2023, right? Right? I don't want to levy the accusation that Lupin has always been like this in the wake of Cagliostro, that movie came out and immediately everyone started cribbing from it. I think it has mostly been obvious in the contemporary era of the franchise. And there's been plenty of experimentation in the past 10-15 years with some of the more mature stuff, but the broad appeal material has been very heavily leaning on nostalgia. And that pretty much always means a new girl. Hell, you can watch this effect happen in real time in Part 4. Rebecca Rossellini is crime Paris Hilton who has the palate of a child and keeps using her divorce papers to get Lupin to do favors for her. And she's a really fun character until they remember what franchise they're in and whack her into a paste with a Clarice stick. No, Rebecca, what about tragic backstory? They have tried to play with the formula and reinvent it and yada yada yada. Unless there's a really smart angle, it very rarely feels new. And it's not to say that there's no good Girl of the Week characters. Like, there's a couple fun ones from the 90s. Ellen was really great. Even Eternal Mermaid was solid, and that movie had 2 girls. But within the most current Lupin revival of the 10s and 20s, it has been kind of grim. I think the best recent example is the Cat's Eye crossover, but that has the obvious benefit of the Cat's Eye girls coming in already fully formed as characters. Baby Sister Eye has to take on some responsibility after Lupin gets the shit beaten out of him so bad that he's practically crawling through the rest of the film, and I think that really works in terms of giving these characters something to do across the entire film and making it feel like a unique dynamic. Yeah, but 9 times out of 10, Lupin, thank you for helping me uncover family secret and saving me from crypto-fascist antagonist. I'll always remember you while I'm off doing character talent. What, do I have to take your girl privileges away and not give them back until you stop being afraid of your own goddamn franchise? It's not like James Bond, where maybe you can make the excuse that Bond is a solo act and you need a girl for each new adventure to be Bond's buddy. You've got a perfectly good cast here you rarely use or develop in any meaningful way. Use them! A series like Zero was such a knockout because it is only about Lupin and Jigen, a relationship which has so much meat, but rarely gets to take center stage like this. You could make a million Zeros based around different internal dynamics and never run out of stuff to talk about. The Woman Called Fujiko Mine is just about Fujiko's relationships with everyone else. But instead we keep running the tapes on, hey, fellow viewer, I too remember The Castle of Cagliostro, 1979, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. I will not go as far as to say that it's the only problem, but I do think among the reasons the franchise at large doesn't always demand attention the way its best entries do, its over-reliance on trying to replicate Cagliostro's structure sits pretty high. I'm not a fan of Koike's films at all, and believe you me, if I've got anything to say about it, his day will come, but I can hardly blame people for enjoying them when it's just something new for once. And the thing is, Miyazaki is famously a very self-critical artist, which is probably part of the reason he is incapable of retiring. But while I question whether his outlook on his filmography is entirely healthy, it's clearly kept him trying new things. It prevents him from resting on his laurels in a way other directors might be tempted to after reaching his level of international acclaim. He never reheats his nachos. You know, people pigeonhole him into being this soft, cozy aesthetic rather than a body of work with things to say. But I think it's worth pointing out that many of the films which try to ape his style without any of the substance largely come out to lukewarm responses. Now, yeah, I've lost my share of my faith in humanity after the glurge of AI-generated Ghibli trash. But when it comes to real movies, people don't actually want something wearing Miyazaki's skin like a flesh suit. Even if it's unfamiliar, they will reliably choose the genuine article for as long as it is an option. You know, oftentimes you go back to an opinion you had a long time ago and you find it's moved around a bit, but I think, genuinely, Time Away has reinforced what I said way back at the start. When the series gives itself over as a playground for artists to experiment, it produces some of its best stuff. And even though the series was so new and risky in some ways, giving Miyazaki and Takahata the chance to stretch their legs and get those careers moving was the best thing they ever did. But to live in that one really good choice forever has kind of proven to be the worst part of 60-odd years of Lupin. And I relate to that. Certainly for a while I had that relationship with this video when it looked like nothing else was ever going to do its original numbers. All you guys who just got here after Man Bad Horror don't know that for 90% of the 3 years I've been running this channel, Miyazaki's Lupin was the best it ever got. Of course I have worried that I peaked way too fast. Am I ever going to be that raw again? Am I ever going to be that engaging again? Is there something in this formula that I can bottle that'll make everything else I do just as good? Or am I going to be living in the shadow of this one win for the rest of my life? And yeah, you know what? You are. If you think that about everything else you make, yeah, you're going to get stuck. But the best you can do is just keep that spontaneity alive. You know, remember why you do it. Remember why you love it. Cherish the process of making and experimenting with the people you get to make with. Fuck the rules. Fuck the easy road. Be the Lupin you want to see in the world. Just maybe not the manga version. Everyone, this has been Miyazaki's Lupin again. Thank you so much for watching or rewatching for many of you. Obviously, a lot of time has passed, and the channel has come very, very far since this first essay. As always, if you like what I do and you want to make sure that you get more stuff quicker, the best way to do that is to support our Patreon. We do monthly movie nights on our private Discord chat, which you can only get as a paid patron. But even if you don't do that, because I know, like, you know, thank you very, very much for rewatching this old video. It did really touch my heart that so many people wanted it back and were looking for alternatives, even though I actually didn't know whether re-uploading it was even going to be possible. Obviously, liking and subscribing are really going to help this video in the long term, but if I can make a special request, if you've been here since the very first time I uploaded this video, please, please, please just feel free to leave a comment, just because that's honestly for me, the biggest loss from that last, from losing the original upload, because, like, it was my first video, you know? It was a very special moment to put something out there like that for the very first time. So that's all that I'm really, really missing, even more so than like any views or anything like that. It's just the benchmark that people respond to what I do, and I'm so grateful that people respond to what I do, genuinely. So thank you again as always. Especially for 3 years of this. I love you all very much, and this video was sponsored by Squarespace.